The night had never been this quiet. It wasn't the hush of sleep or the calm before dawn. It was the silence of expectation, of history about to turn. Ethan stood atop the old watchtower on the outskirts of the new settlement they had named Harbor's End. The name was a promise, not the end of hope, but the end of running. Below him, the lights of the refugee camps flickered against the dark, scattered like fallen stars. Hundreds had gathered here since the data from the mothership had been transmitted. Families, fighters, survivors from distant sectors who had followed the signal they thought would never come. Now, that signal pulsed from a relay tower built from salvaged tech and pieces of the mothership's old systems. A single, persistent broadcast reaching beyond the barren plains, beyond the fractured cities, beyond fear. You are not alone. The truth has come. The time to rise is now. Those words played on repeat. Simple, direct, but powerful enough to stir the hearts of thousands. Ethan watched as Mara approached across the catwalk, her coat rippling in the cool night wind. Behind her came Soren, now recovered from his wounds but carrying new scars, both visible and hidden. Lyra followed, eyes bright in the starlight, the data seed hanging like a pendant around her neck. It glowed faintly, resonating with the tower's broadcast. "It's working," Mara said softly, coming to stand beside Ethan. "We've received acknowledgments from 3 more enclaves. A resistance group from the north, 2 hybrid safe zones. They've heard us." "And?" Ethan asked, though he already sensed the answer. "They're ready to fight." He exhaled slowly. For months, he had wondered if anyone would listen, if the fear that had kept people silent for so long would choke out hope. But now the first threads of a new alliance were forming. Fragile, but real. Still, victory was not certain. Not even close. Soren leaned against the tower's rail. "Some of the relays farther out are down. Either interference or Rail's hunters," Mara finished grimly. The name sent a ripple of unease through them all. Rail had survived. The collapse of the mothership had only deepened his obsession. Word had spread from survivors who had escaped other camps. Rail now commanded not just cleaners, but a new force, sentinels, biosynthetics stronger than the creature Lyra had once repelled. They hunted silently, mercilessly, striking down any who dared broadcast the truth. "He's not just suppressing the message," Soren said. "He's escalating." Entire camps have gone dark after responding to the signal. Mara's jaw tightened, which means the more we speak out, the harder he'll hit. Ethan nodded. "That's exactly why we must keep going. If we stop now, those camps died for nothing." Lyra stepped forward. Though young, her voice held a quiet strength beyond her years. The voice says others are listening. Farther away than we've ever reached, in places even Rail can't silence. "The outer zones?" Mara asked. Lyra shook her head. "Farther." They exchanged uneasy glances. Some dismissed it as her imagination, or the lingering effects of her hybrid bloodline. But Ethan trusted her instincts. The beacon had never failed them. Suddenly, the radio beside Ethan crackled. Jonas's voice steady but urgent. "Ethan, we've got movement near the southern ridge. Small convoy. Looks like a civilian group, but they're flying neutral colors. Could be survivors. Could be a trap." Ethan grabbed his rifle and motioned to Mara. "Let's go." Within minutes, they were at the southern checkpoint. Spotlights illuminated a battered line of vehicles approaching along the old highway. 2 trucks, a transport rig, and a small crawler designed for desert terrain. The lead truck stopped. A tall woman climbed out, hands raised in a gesture of peace. Behind her, Figures gathered. Fighters, families, children. Many wore makeshift armor or carried old, mismatched weapons. "I'm Commander Nyla of the Driftwood Enclave," the woman called. "We received your signal. We've come to join the fight." Ethan and Mira exchanged glances. Slowly, they stepped forward. "We can't guarantee your safety," Ethan warned. "If you stay, you'll become a target." Nyla smiled grimly. "We've been targets for years. At least now we can fight for something that matters." Ethan nodded. "Then welcome to Harbor's End." As the newcomers entered the settlement, more radios began to light up. Messages from distant places, codes and call signs they hadn't heard in years. Survivors. Fighters. Entire groups pledging support. The signal was no longer just a message. It was a movement. Ethan looked to the horizon. Somewhere out there, Rael was already planning his next strike. But this time, the resistance was ready. And they had something Rael could never understand. Hope. The great hall at Harbor's End had once been a repair hangar. Now, its rusted beams and patched walls enclosed the fragile heart of the uprising. Leaders from across the territories gathered here. Some had traveled weeks through dangerous lands to reach this place. They represented hybrid enclaves, human outposts, and scattered survivor bands. For the first time, these fractured voices stood under one roof. But unity was proving harder than they had hoped. Ethan stood at the head of the assembly. To his right, Mira watched silently. Lyra sat beside her, the beacon clasped between her hands. Soren leaned against a wall nearby, arms crossed, gaze sharp. On the floor below, the leaders argued in waves of rising voices. "If we continue broadcasting the signal, we'll bring Rael's army straight to us," warned Captain Vey, a grizzled soldier from Sector 9. "Some of us have families to protect. Entire towns. We can't risk them for this idealism." "And if we stop now," countered Nyla, the Driftwood commander who had arrived only days before, "then we go back to living in fear, running, dying one by one." "The cleaners have offered terms," said Marshal Dren, a heavy-set man from the southern valleys. "Limited autonomy. If we silence the beacon, they'll leave us in peace." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's not peace. That's surrender." "And how long do you think those terms will last once we give up the truth?" Drain held his ground. "I've seen too much death. My people won't survive another war." "You won't survive submission either," Mira said quietly. "Rael will break his promises the moment it suits him." Others remained silent, caught between fear and hope. Soren finally spoke, voice low but cutting through the noise. "We've already sacrificed too much to turn back." Ava, Gale, countless others. "The cleaners don't want peace. They want obedience." Captain Vey shook his head. "Easy for you to say. You don't have children hiding in bunkers, waiting for soldiers to take them." Lyra stood then, her small figure commanding unexpected attention. Her violet eyes glowed softly in the dim light. "My family was hunted too. My bloodline made me a target before I even knew what the cleaners were. But running didn't save us. It was standing together that gave us a chance." The room quieted. Then Commander Nyla stepped forward. "We've already seen what happens when we trust Rael's promises. Driftwood tried to negotiate once. We lost half our people before the talks even began." Mira touched Ethan's arm. He could feel the unease in her grip. This wasn't just fear. It was desperation. Many of these leaders weren't warriors. They were protectors. Farmers, engineers, parents. They had built small, fragile lives in the shadows, not for glory, but for survival. And now survival was no longer enough. Ethan drew a deep breath. I'm not forcing anyone to stay. If you want to leave Harbor's End, take your people and go. But if you stay, you fight. Not just for yourselves, but for every enclave, every child, every hidden camp still hoping for freedom. Silence stretched long and heavy. Finally, Dren shook his head. I can't. My people won't survive this. He turned, motioning to a handful of his counselors. They walked out without another word. Captain Vey hesitated but remained. Others watched quietly, weighing loyalty against fear. After the last dissenters had left, Nyla looked around the room. Those who remain, we stand together. A murmur of agreement swept through the assembly. Ethan felt the weight of that choice settle over him. Those who stayed were choosing war, choosing to risk everything. And the blood of whatever came next would stain all their hands. That night, as the hall emptied, Ethan stood alone beneath the old beams. Mara joined him, silent for a long moment before speaking. We've lost some, but we've kept the ones willing to fight, Ethan replied. His voice was steady, but inside he felt the burden of leadership pressing harder than ever. Mara touched his face, drawing his gaze to hers. You're doing what Gale believed in, what Ava gave her life for. Don't doubt now. Ethan nodded slowly. Outside in the chill night air, Lyra stood near the relay tower. The beacon pulsed softly in her hands, casting faint light on her face. The voice says more are listening, she whispered as Ethan and Mara approached. Even though some have left, more are waiting, and they're afraid too, but they want to believe. Mara smiled faintly. Then we keep giving them something to believe in. From the ridgelines beyond, a cold wind stirred. The night whispered of coming storms, but Harbor's End stood firm, and the rising signal had only just begun. The moon hung low over the plains, casting silver light across the barren landscape. Far from Harbor's End, beneath a crumbling overpass long abandoned by the old world, a different gathering unfolded. Cleaners stood in silent ranks, their armor marked with the crimson serpent. Between them, sentinels, Rael's biosynthetic hunters, waited without breath or movement. But it wasn't Rael who addressed them now. At the center of the assembly stood a woman cloaked in black and deep violet. Her hair, once a soft brown, now shimmered with silver strands. Her eyes, bright with unnatural clarity, glowed faintly under the moonlight. Her name was Alara. To the cleaners, she was the voice, the seer. Rael's chosen, but once, long ago, she had been something else entirely. She had been one of Gale's rescued children. One of Lyra's first companions in the hidden schools, where hybrids learned to control their abilities. A girl who loved stories about stars and dreamed of finding her place among both humans and her alien kin. That girl was gone. Rael had broken her mind and rebuilt it, shaped her into a weapon not of brute force, but of thought, of manipulation. She no longer remembered her true past, only the purpose Rael had burned into her soul. Control them. Break their unity. Sow doubt where hope takes root. Now she moved between the cleaners, touching each sentinel in turn. Her fingers glided over their metal skin, transmitting silent commands. Not words, not code, emotion. Fear, despair, submission. These were her weapons. You've heard the beacon, Alara spoke, her voice smooth and calm. The lies it spreads. The promises it cannot keep. The cleaners bowed their heads. The sentinels watched her with blank eyes. The signal has reached farther than Rael predicted. The hybrid girl, Lyra, has awakened more than just memory. She has stirred rebellion in hearts that once accepted control. Her eyes narrowed. She could feel the pull of the beacon even now. Not as a message of hope, but as a challenge to her authority. Ethan Grayson's alliance grows bolder. Harbor's End has become their sanctuary. Alara stepped forward, her cloak swirling like liquid shadow. We will take that sanctuary from them, not with fire alone, not with blood. She paused, raising her hand. A faint ripple spread through the air, a psychic pulse that touched every mind present. We will take their will. Behind her, Rael emerged from the shadows. His armor still bore the scars from the mothership's collapse, but his presence remained as cold and commanding as ever. You've done well, Alara, he said quietly. Ethan's soldiers are prepared for battle. They expect warriors. They do not expect you. Alara inclined her head. I will make them question everything, even each other. Rael approached, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. To an outsider, the gesture might have seemed paternal, protective, but those who knew Rael's ways understood the truth. Alara was his creation, his most dangerous tool. You will infiltrate their dreams, he continued. Whisper to their fears. Convince them that Harbor's End cannot stand, that Grayson cannot lead. Alara closed her eyes. Already, she could feel the threads of connection stretching between herself and those who carried the hybrid gene, even those who had never awakened their abilities. Soren, Lyra, others, all vulnerable to her reach. And if they resist? She asked softly. Rael's silver eyes gleamed. Then break them. A sentinel approached carrying a tablet. Surveillance confirms a recent divide within the Alliance. Some leaders oppose Grayson's tactics. Seeds of doubt already grow. Alara smiled. I will water them. Rael nodded. You leave tonight. As the cleaners and sentinels dispersed, preparing for the assault to come, Alara remained motionless beneath the moon. A cold wind stirred, carrying the distant pulse of the beacon. For a brief, flickering instant, something deep within her stirred. Not obedience, not power, a memory. A younger voice, Lyra's voice. We'll always protect each other, no matter what. Alara's eyes snapped open, the glow intensifying. She crushed the memory before it could take root. That girl was gone. Now she served a greater purpose. And when Harbor's End fell, no one would even remember her name. The desert night was sharp and cold, each breath drawing a fine mist into the moonlit air. Ethan knelt beside the scout drone, its camera feed showing the target ahead, a walled compound built from pre-war concrete and scavenged steel. Floodlights swept the perimeter. Guard towers stood silent but deadly, each manned by cleaners. Inside that compound, hybrids were being held. Not just soldiers or rebels, families, children. Survivors from smaller enclaves who had been captured when Rael's sentinels crushed their safe zones. We hit fast, we hit hard, and we get them out before reinforcements arrive, Ethan whispered. Beside him, Mara loaded her rifle with practiced calm. Soren checked the charge on his plasma blade. Neela crouched nearby, leading a small unit of driftwood fighters armed with a mix of pulse rifles and kinetic rounds. And Lyra, wrapped in a dark cloak, watched the compound with wide, solemn eyes. The beacon glowed faintly beneath the folds of her clothing. The voice says they're afraid, she murmured. Not the guards. The people inside, they don't know we're coming. They will soon, Ethan replied. The plan was simple in theory. Soren and Nyla's team would breach the west gate, creating a diversion. Ethan, Mara, and Lyra would enter through a maintenance tunnel mapped out by Finn before his betrayal. The prisoners were held underground, hidden from aerial surveillance and perhaps from the worst of Rael's experiments. At Ethan's signal, the team moved. The west gate exploded in a flash of fire and smoke. Sirens blared. Cleaners scrambled to respond. Under that cover, Ethan led his group toward the tunnel. The entrance had once been a storm drain. Now it was half buried beneath rubble. Mara helped clear the last stones while Soren stood guard. They slipped inside. The air was damp and smelled of rust. Faint water dripped from the ceiling. The further they moved, the louder the sounds of the battle above became. A deliberate distraction, pulling the guards away from the lower levels. As they reached the end of the tunnel, Ethan paused. Soren, watch the rear. Mara, with me. They pushed open a maintenance hatch and emerged into a dimly lit corridor. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The walls were marked with graffiti and numbers, the remnants of an old emergency shelter converted into a prison. Lyra stiffened. They're here. Down this way. They moved quickly. The first room they found held a small group of hybrid adults. Thin, malnourished. Eyes wide with disbelief when Ethan's team burst in. We're getting you out, Ethan said firmly. Now, but the next chamber struck deeper. Children, at least 20, most under the age of 10. Their skin bore the telltale pallor of those who had been kept in darkness too long. Some had bruises, scars. When Lyra entered, they recoiled at first, frightened by any sudden change. Then the beacon pulsed, a warm, gentle glow. The children froze, their frightened expressions softened into cautious wonder. One little boy, no older than 5, whispered, "Are you the girl from the signal?" Lyra nodded. "Yes." Mara knelt beside them. "We're taking you somewhere safe. Can you walk?" Most nodded silently. A few had to be carried. Ethan motioned for Soren, who appeared moments later. "The main guard force is still above. Nyla's team is holding the west gate, but reinforcements are coming fast." "We'll use the maintenance tunnel," Ethan replied. "It's the only way out now." As they gathered the prisoners, Lyra suddenly gasped. Her eyes fluttered closed. "Ethan, something's wrong. She's here." Before Ethan could ask who, a figure stepped into the corridor ahead. Alara. Her black and violet cloak billowed slightly, though there was no breeze. The glow in her silvered eyes was both familiar and chilling. Mara lifted her rifle instantly. "Stay back." Alara didn't move. "You can't save them all," she said softly. "Every child you rescue today will only face death tomorrow. Rael will not stop. You cannot protect them." "You were one of them once," Ethan said, voice low. "You stood where Lyra stands now. You knew what this fight meant." For a heartbeat, something flickered in Alara's eyes. A memory, a shadow of doubt. Then it vanished. "I know what the fight costs," she replied coldly. "And I won't let you lead these people to ruin." She raised one hand. A psychic pulse rippled through the corridor. Several of the hybrid prisoners staggered. A few dropped to their knees, clutching their heads. Alara's power wasn't brute force. It was control, manipulation, fear. But Lyra stepped forward. "No." The beacon pulsed brighter, pushing back the psychic wave. Alara faltered, eyes narrowing in frustration. "You're stronger than before," she whispered. Lyra nodded. "And I'm not alone." Behind her, the rescued prisoners stood tall despite their fear. Mara, Soren, and Ethan raised their weapons, not to attack, but as a promise. Alara hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty crossed her face. Then, with a swirl of her cloak, she retreated into the shadows. Ethan didn't wait. Move. Now! The team and their precious cargo raced back to the tunnel. As they emerged into the cool night beyond the compound, Nyla's transports waited, engines running. Cleaners surged behind them, but the vehicles accelerated into the darkness, leaving the prison and rails forces behind. They had won this battle, but Alara's words lingered in Ethan's mind. You can't save them all. Not yet. But he would try. The convoy rolled across the wasteland beneath a sky heavy with stars. Dust trailed behind the transports as Ethan sat beside Mara in the lead vehicle, watching the horizon darken toward the east. Lyra sat between them, the beacon resting in her lap. It pulsed softly, steady as a heartbeat. The rescued hybrids slept in the back of the trucks, exhaustion finally overtaking fear. Some held hands. Others clutched old, tattered blankets or each other. Their faces, though worn from captivity, now carried something unfamiliar. Hope. But Ethan's mind remained heavy with the memory of Alara's words. You can't save them all. He wanted to believe that wasn't true. Yet the battle ahead would test that belief more than ever. As the vehicles rumbled toward harbor's end, Lyra stirred. Her violet eyes opened, and the beacon flared brighter. Ethan, she whispered, the voice is stronger now. It's trying to show us something we've missed. Mara frowned. Another transmission? No. Lyra shook her head. Memories. Ethan exchanged a glance with Mara. Without a word, he tapped the dashboard twice. An old signal for Soren and Nyla in the other vehicles. They would stop at the next secure point. 2 hours later, under the cover of a rocky overhang, the convoy halted. Fires were built low and shielded from aerial scouts. The children were settled with guards. Ethan gathered the leaders, Mara, Soren, Nyla, and brought Lyra to the command vehicle where a portable relay had been set up. The beacon wants to reveal something, Lyra said, placing it onto the table. Its light expanded into a holographic field, symbols dancing in the air. The patterns were ancient, older than any known alien language the cleaners had ever catalogued. Finn had once called it the Forgotten Script. Soren leaned forward. It's not a message. It's a genetic code. Lyra nodded. But not just a map of hybrid DNA. It's a story. The story of where we really come from. The field shifted. An image took shape. A star cluster unfamiliar to any charted sector. A single planet highlighted among the void. A voice, calm and timeless, spoke not in words but in pure thought. The translation came through the beacon's systems. Long before the wars of Earth, long before human history, a civilization crossed the void seeking refuge. Their world consumed by forces they could not defeat, they looked for a species that could carry their legacy forward. They chose humanity. Not to rule, not to conquer, but to join. Images played of tall, luminous beings working alongside early humans, not in dominance, but in partnership. Sharing knowledge, guiding. Hybrids were not meant to be weapons. They were meant to be bridges. Mira exhaled slowly. The first hybrids were the hope of two worlds. Soren's eyes narrowed. Then why did the cleaners turn against that purpose? The projection shifted. A second voice spoke now, bitter, urgent. Fear. As humanity advanced, old factions within the councils feared losing control. They rejected the bond. They created the first cleaners to erase the experiment. But the memory remained. Hidden. Passed down. You, child of the beacon, are the key to remembering. The projection centered on Lyra, a DNA strand illuminated, not just hybrid. Something more, a marker that matched the ancient script. Mera's voice shook. You carry their last signal, their last hope. Lyra looked down at her hands. That's why Alara couldn't control me. The voice protects me. Ethan stared at the star map. And if we can awaken that memory in others, we can unite the hybrids, Nyla finished. Not just as survivors, but as the heirs of a mission older than any of us. The beacon pulsed again. A new thread of data unfolded. Coordinates. Deep desert. An old listening post long thought abandoned. Soren frowned. That's Cleaner's territory now. Rail has probably fortified it. Ethan nodded. Which means whatever's there is exactly what he doesn't want us to find. The leaders fell silent. The weight of the truth pressed down on them all. They were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting to reclaim a destiny stolen from them. Mera reached out, taking Ethan's hand. It's time the Cleaners understood. We won't just resist anymore. We'll remember who we were meant to be. Lyra smiled, a rare and radiant thing. The voice agrees. The convoy prepared to move again, heading not for safety, but toward the very heart of enemy territory. The truth had changed everything, and the next battle would be for more than freedom. It would be for the right to define the future itself. The journey to the old listening post took 3 days. 3 days of tense silence broken only by the hum of engines and the distant calls of desert creatures. Ethan's convoy moved cautiously, avoiding satellite scans and patrol routes mapped by Soren's scouts. The deeper they traveled into Cleaner-held territory, the thinner the air seemed to grow, not just from the altitude, but from the weight of unseen eyes. On the third night, the group made camp beneath a ridge of ancient black stone. The stars above were cold and sharp, watching from the void as they always had. Ethan gathered with Mera, Soren, Nyla, and the newest addition to their council, Talon Vey, former captain of Sector 9. After his initial doubts at Harbor's End, Vey had returned, bringing with him a unit of hardened fighters and an oath to stand with the resistance. His knowledge of Cleaner patrol patterns had already saved them twice. Now he stood by the fire, studying the star map projected by the beacon. Tomorrow, Ethan said, pointing to the coordinates, we hit the listening post, fast and silent. We secure whatever the beacon has led us to, then pull back before Rail knows we're there. Vey nodded. We've mapped a tunnel approach. Fewer guards. Cleaner patrols cycle every 6 hours. Mera frowned. What about sentinels? Vey hesitated. None spotted yet. But that could change. As the leaders finalized the plan, Lyra sat apart, the beacon resting in her lap. Its light pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Soren approached her quietly. Are you hearing anything new? Lyra nodded. The voice says we're close, but it also says someone among us carries shadows. Soren's expression hardened. A spy? Before Lyra could answer, a shout rang out from the watch perimeter. Movement! Ethan grabbed his rifle, heart pounding. Mera was already at his side, weapon raised. The outer guards had detained a figure approaching the camp alone, hooded, cloaked in desert garb. When the guards pulled back the hood, Ethan froze. Jonas, one of Gale's old contacts. A smuggler turned resistance courier. He looked half dead from exhaustion, lips cracked, eyes hollow. Ethan, he gasped, you have to listen. There's a traitor in your council. Mera stepped forward cautiously. Who? Jonas sagged to his knees. Talon Vey. He's working with Rail. He led you here. A ripple of shock swept through the gathered fighters. Vey stepped out from the shadows, arms raised, face a mask of disbelief. That's a lie. Jonas disappeared 2 weeks ago. He could have been captured, turned. Jonas shook his head violently. No, I escaped. I heard Vey negotiating with a cleaner officer. He promised to deliver the resistance leadership in exchange for safe passage for his unit and family. Ethan's mind raced. It was possible Jonas had been compromised, tortured, fed lies. But it was also possible he was telling the truth. Soren's hand hovered near his sidearm. Nyla looked between Jonas and Vey, uncertain. Mara spoke, calm but firm. Jonas, do you have proof? Jonas pulled a data chip from his coat. Recorded the conversation before I escaped. Ethan took it, sliding it into the portable console. Audio crackled to life. Secure the coordinates. Deliver Grayson, Mara, and the hybrid child. In exchange, Sector 9's refugees go free. Vey's voice. Clear. Cold. Calculating. The camp fell into stunned silence. Vey's expression hardened. His facade crumbled. I did what I had to, he snarled. We would all die following Grayson's war. My people, my family, would have survived. Soren drew his weapon. And you would have delivered children to Rael's knives. Vey's hand darted toward his belt. Too late. Soren fired. Vey crumpled to the ground, blood dark against the sand. Jonas sank fully to the earth, relief and grief warring on his face. Ethan's stomach turned. He led Rael straight to us. As if summoned by the words, the night trembled. From the far ridges, lights flared. Columns of cleaner transports moving fast. Sentinels marched at their sides, their forms gleaming beneath the stars. The betrayal had cost them precious time. Rael's forces were already closing in. Mira's eyes met Ethan's. We have to reach the listening post before they do. Whatever the beacon wants us to find. We can't let Rael claim it. Ethan nodded. Soren, rally the fighters. Nyla, prep the convoy. Jonas, you ride with us. He turned to Lyra. Stay close. From here on out, we trust only those who've stood beside us in battle. The girl's face was pale, but her resolve burned bright. I understand, she said. The voice says the time for doubt is over. As the convoy roared to life and the camp mobilized, Ethan felt the weight of the coming fight press down on his shoulders. They had been betrayed, hunted, cornered, but they were not broken. By dawn, they would either uncover the truth or fall trying. The convoy tore across the barren flats, dawn breaking like fire behind them. Ahead, the terrain dipped sharply into the El Tara Valley, a scar in the earth where ancient rivers had once run. Now the valley floor was cracked and dry, littered with bones of dead machinery from wars long past. At the valley's far edge stood the old listening post. Concrete domes and antenna towers rose against the horizon, weathered but intact. It wasn't just a ruin. It was the key. The beacon pulsed in Lyra's hands, its light steady and urgent. The voice says the archive is beneath the post, she told Ethan. Buried deep. If Rael gets there first, he'll erase everything. Ethan nodded, eyes scanning the ridgelines. Then we hold this ground. No matter what it takes. Soren and Nyla deployed the fighters swiftly. Transport vehicles were converted into barricades. Pulse rifles were distributed. The rescued hybrids, those able to fight, took up defensive positions. But the cleaners moved faster than expected. By the time Ethan's forces had fortified the valley's northern rim, Rael's army appeared over the southern ridge. Cleaners marched in tight formations. Sentinel units stalked beside them, eyes burning cold. And at the center rode Rael himself, clad in black and silver armor, Alara standing at his side. Her gaze swept the valley, pausing on Lyra. No words passed between them, but Ethan felt the tension like a blade against his throat. "You've both come too far to back down now," Mira said softly beside him. "Whatever happens today, we end this." Rael raised his arm. The cleaners surged forward. The battle began. Plasma fire ripped through the air. Barricades shuddered. Sentinels struck with ruthless precision, their synthetic limbs tearing through defenders. Ethan fought at the front, rifle steady, heart pounding. Around him, the fighters of Driftwood, Sector 4, and the newly freed hybrids held the line. Mira moved like a storm, swift and deadly. Soren led counterattacks, blade flashing with blue energy, but for every cleaner they felled, more advanced. At the rear, Nyla's team worked to access the listening post. The entrance was sealed by old security locks. They would need time. Too much time. Ethan's line began to buckle. The cleaners pressed hard. A sentinel crashed through the left flank, scattering defenders. Ethan raced to intercept, only to see Lyra step into the machine's path. Her eyes glowed bright violet. The beacon in her hands pulsed once, then flared like a small sun. The sentinel froze mid-stride, its limbs convulsed. Metal groaned. Then it collapsed in a heap. The cleaners hesitated, fear rippling through their ranks for the first time. Alara's voice rang out over the battlefield, cold and commanding. "Ignore the girl, press the assault." But Lyra raised the beacon high. "No more hiding," she said, voice steady. "No more running. We remember." A wave of energy spread from the beacon, washing over the hybrids. The effect was immediate. Those with latent abilities felt their strength awaken. One hybrid sent a ripple through the earth, toppling cleaner ranks. Another unleashed a blinding flare of light that shielded the defenders. Even those without powers felt the surge, a renewal of courage, of clarity. The cleaners wavered. Rael snarled and pointed toward Lyra. "Alara, end this." Alara leapt from her mount, cloak billowing. Her mind lashed out in a psychic storm aimed at Lyra. But this time, Lyra stood firm. The beacon's light countered Alara's mental strike, and for a heartbeat, their minds touched. In that instant, Alara's memories returned. The school, Gale's kindness, laughing beside Lyra beneath the old solar arrays. Promises to protect each other. Her breath caught. Rael's voice cut like a whip. "Obey!" Alara's hesitation shattered. She screamed and struck again, but Lyra didn't fight alone. Ethan and Mira flanked her, rifles raised. Soren charged a sentinel, clearing a path. The hybrids rallied behind Lyra, their newfound powers forcing the cleaners back. For the first time, Rael's army faltered. At the listening post, Nyla's team broke through the final lock. "We're in." Lyra looked at Alara. "You can still choose. Remember who you were." Alara's hands trembled. I don't know how." Lyra reached out. "Then let me help." The beacon flared not as a weapon, but as a bridge. Light enveloped them both. The psychic storm ceased. Alara fell to her knees, tears mingling with dust. Rael roared in fury, ordering a final charge, but the defenders stood unyielding. Inside the listening post, the archive activated. Towers pulsed with ancient power. A transmission surged outward, not just to allies, but to every hidden enclave. To the stars themselves. We remember, Rael's forces broke. Some fled. Others were captured. Rael himself disappeared into the smoke and ruin. Eltara Valley had been defended. But at a cost. Dozens lay fallen. Nyla cradled a wounded fighter. Soren limped, bleeding but alive. Ethan embraced Mara, both battle-worn but resolute. Lyra knelt beside Alara, who finally looked at her with clear eyes. "I'm sorry. You remembered," Lyra whispered. "That's enough." As dawn rose over the scarred valley, the survivors gathered. They had won not just a battle, but reclaimed their purpose. The revolution was no longer a dream. It was real, and it had just begun. The fires of battle had burned low, leaving behind the quiet weight of survival. Eltara Valley, once a graveyard of machines and memories, now stood as a symbol of defiance. Smoke drifted lazily into the pale morning sky, mingling with the scent of scorched metal and dry earth. But amid the ruins, life stirred. The fighters of Harbor's End, Driftwood, Sector 4, and the newly freed hybrids gathered before the ancient listening post. Their faces bore the grime and scars of battle, but their eyes were bright with something no weapon could extinguish. Hope. Inside the control chamber of the listening post, Ethan stood before the central console. Mira was at his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Soren, bandaged but unbowed, leaned against a pillar. Nyla stood with her surviving fighters, faces solemn. And at the heart of it all, Lyra. The beacon pulsed gently in her hands, its light filling the chamber with a soft golden glow. Alara stood near the doorway, silent. Her former role as Rael's weapon had not been forgotten, but her choice to turn back had earned her a place among the survivors. The room was quiet as Ethan placed his hand on the activation pad. "This is it," Mira whispered. "Are you ready?" Ethan nodded. "We all are." The console flared to life. Across the valley, ancient transmission towers hummed and turned skyward. Their signals stretched beyond the horizon, bouncing from satellite remains and deep space relays still orbiting Earth. Lyra's voice carried the first words, "To every survivor, to every hidden enclave. To those who remember and those who have forgotten." Her voice was calm, but beneath it ran a strength no enemy could match. We are not alone. We never were. Our bloodlines carry the legacy of two worlds, not as weapons, not as experiments, but as bridges, as hope. Outside, the crowd listened in silence. The cleaners have ruled through fear and silence. But no more. Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady. Today, at Eltara, we stood together. Humans. Hybrids, families, fighters. And we reclaimed not only our freedom, but our purpose. We declare the rise of the united resistance. Mara's voice joined his, clear and unshaken. We will protect those who cannot fight. We will shelter those who seek peace. And we will stand against Rael and every force that seeks to divide us. If you can hear this, if you have ever doubted that unity is possible, come to us. Join us. Outside the post, radios crackled. Portable receivers buzzed. Across the wastelands, in bunkers, caves, and hidden settlements, survivors leaned close, hearing the message. And far above in orbit, long-dormant satellites reawakened. Some relayed the signal across continents. Others, unknown even to the cleaners, transmitted farther still, out into space, to whatever allies might remain, or to whoever might be listening beyond the stars. The broadcast continued. We remember who we are, and we will never kneel again. A cheer rippled through the gathered survivors. Small at first, then louder, rising into a roar that echoed off the cliffs and ridges of El Tara Valley. Tears glimmered in Mara's eyes. Soren smiled despite his wounds. Nyla raised her rifle in salute. Even Alara closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her, a sound she had once thought she'd never hear again. Ethan looked out at the faces before him. Children who had once cowered in cages now stood with heads high. Fighters who had doubted now held weapons with purpose. Families torn apart by fear had become a new family, one chosen not by blood, but by belief. The united resistance had been born not just from battle, but from sacrifice, courage, and the refusal to give up. And they were no longer alone. Lyra touched Ethan's arm. "The voice says others are coming, more than we can count." Ethan smiled. "Then we'd better get ready." As the sun climbed higher, casting golden light over the valley, the survivors began preparations. They would fortify El Tara, train the willing, protect the weak. The fight was far from over. Rael remained at large. The cleaners would strike again, but for the first time, the resistance was not reacting. They were leading. As the crowd dispersed to their duties, Ethan stood with Mara and Lyra at the ridge, looking out over the awakening valley. For the first time in years, the future did not seem like a battlefield. It seemed like a beginning. Across the galaxies, across time itself, you found your way here. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments and stand with the resistance. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications because the next chapter will take us deeper into the unknown. And the fight for Earth's future is only just beginning.